Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video, continuing our series on looking at every faction that's already been introduced and what might be missing for them, as we can potentially look in the future towards some DLC. Obviously this would be in reference to that of cross-game DLC, which I don't think would happen early on, but this could give us a good gauge to realize if we could get 1, 2, or a few FLC packs. It really much depends. This was a series that I did way back then, very early into 2020, and obviously now since the channel has changed, and I've improved with my script writing and presentation, I feel like it would be a better time to redo this so we can go into it in a little bit more detail. So with all that being said, today we turn our attentions to the vampire counts, a race which has already had a rework, despite no DLC throughout the lifespan of Warhammer 2, which is quite weird, but has had a decent amount of attention during the lifespan of Game 1, mostly focusing around one particular bloodline, so there is quite a few things that could be introduced to make things a bit more unique. We'll start off with anything relating to generic Lord and Hero choices, as really not a lot is actually missing. Keep in mind that the main reference for these types of videos are of course around 8th edition, obviously looking a little bit back, but as Creative Assembly said that they want to focus on 8th edition, that will be the focus. If we look towards the generic lord choices, we're missing an option for generic vampire lords to have access to the lore of death or the lore of shadow. The Lamian vampire lord has access to a bit of a mix of the lore, but the generic vampire lord only has access to the lore of vampires, which is a bit of a shame as some people do prefer the other lores. It's just something that's been missing for a while. The same thing with necromancers missing out on the lore of death. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Everything seems to just be holding up with the lore of vampires, which, yeah, it's a good lore, don't get me wrong, but some options would obviously be nice. This is not just for the vampires, but literally every single faction. Really, that's all the missing types of generic lords. It would be nice if we had it for all the other type of bloodlines too, as we do have a generic Strigoi and a generic Von Carstein. Well, the Vampire Count Lord hasn't really been known as a Von Carstein, but everyone associates it with that. But it would be nice to have a generic Necrotic, a generic Blood Dragon, and so on, because it just kind of fits with the theme, especially if their legendary lord counterparts get released. It would just be kind of cool to have armies which are themed and you don't have to get the pseudo-legendary lords, as that limits you to a certain amount. When it comes to generic heroes, interestingly enough, it's the reverse. We're missing a generic vampire with the lore of vampires, which is strange because, you know, reskin and that's it. Wait, never mind, because they're actually using the female model instead, so literally just get another copy-paste of the female model and then just give them the lore of vampires. Same thing with the necromancer missing out with the lore of death, which they only have access to the lore of vampires, and I understand that if those stronger lores were given in, they'd probably be focused on more, but some people will still use the others, so it's not really stopping the player from having the choice or anything. It's just a bit of a shame that we don't have that yet, because again, that would literally just be a reskin. There is one missing hero choice, which is the Cairn Wraith, but I really don't see that being implemented because the Banshee itself is the upgraded version of it, so it's probably not going to be made in, though I do imagine that some modders have also implemented that through their own mods. I obviously have to mention that because the completionists will say, well, you've missed that one out, and I totally agree. It would be cool to see a possible option. It would be a cheaper version, a weaker version, but sometimes you won't be able to afford it, depending on how bad you are with keeping up your economy and so on. Either way, completionist's sake would be nice. It's the same thing as some people asking for a White King, which is actually a Lord choice, but I don't see a point for that. Because, really, we find out that they're just mostly servants, and, well, barring Krell, because Krell was more sentient than he let on, apparently, but other than that, I think that's pretty much everything. Generic vampire hero options would be cool too, but I think they'll mostly stay as lords, and you'll just be able to use necromancers and white kings and so on instead. So with that, we're able to move on, and we're going to start looking towards just a singular mount option that was available to characters known as the Abyssal Terror. These were creatures of chaos that were able to be resurrected. It's one of those odd things because you never really hear of that much. Yes, servants such as like Krell and so on, yes, but a fully mutated creature, very uncommon. These are flying mounts. No two was supposed to be kind of the same because the vampire or the necromancer would stitch their own to whatever they needed. However, there was a generic model option which was a pain to keep together before people started realizing of a handy tip called pinning, so you could keep your pieces of your models together without them exploding. These were fairly large types of flying mounts, which, you know, is expected from an undead army. They also were able to get poison attacks. You could also give them armor piercing special rules and so on. There's nothing too special about about these creatures other than the fact that they just look strange and people liked them because of that. And I believe they were on a 50 mil base, or was it a 40, which made it easier for them to move around than, say, for example, a Terrorgeist, which, you know, or a Zombie Dragon. Those were on massive bases, so it made them easier to snipe. At this point, really, they aren't too needed, but they're just kind of cool looking, and, you know, Rule of Cool is always fun, especially when it comes to Warhammer, so it would be nice if we saw these eventually, though with complete honesty, I would not be disappointed if we never saw them. It would just be a shame, but that's it. So now we can move on to missing units, and first up we've got the Coven Throne, which was a mount option too, but it could work as both, and it was just kind of cool because it was from the same kit as that of the Mortis engine, though they both kind of worked in a different sense. The Mortis engine on the tabletop was focused mostly about buffing up magic. It was just kind of ridiculous and it was really, really good. Now, the Coven Throne instead would focus around debuffing enemies really heavily. This goes around, say for example, making them have less weapon skill and ballistic skill, making enemies reroll successful hits so they might end up missing instead, or even turning them against each other so they'll start attacking each other. It's something really cool. This was kind of popular just because of that, and it looks really cool too. You can see it on screen right now. Obviously this mount is linked to the Lemian bloodline, so it's probably the fact that since we don't have Neferata yet, that's why we haven't seen this unit, as it kind of fits as a mainstay for anything vampiric. Next we have the Spirit Host, which is one of my favorite units from the tabletop. In fact, I believe I have around 15 swarms of those painted up. Now, the Spirit Hosts are a swarm unit, as you can imagine. Ethereal, undead, they were there to be a tar pit, but they were a very strong tar pit when compared to any others, like say, for example, the Giant Rat Swarms, or even the ones that the Tomb Kings had with the Beetles and so on, because they were ethereal. In the tabletop, ethereal was a rather powerful rule, as it meant that nothing of them would get hit, and it was very unlikely that they would lose combat resolution just because of that, because they could still do damage, but they would not get damaged back unless there were magical weapons involved or magic. Obviously, Ethereal works a bit different when it comes to anything Total War related, but it's still a cool unit, and they look kind of nice. There's two variants, the standard old school one, which was pretty much just ghosts, and then the more ghoulish, ghostly appearance of that of the End Times one, which more than likely, if we get anything, it's going to be the End Times one, because, I mean, it just kind of fits with the theme, it looks better, rather than just a bunch of Tomb Banshees. Swarms are more than possible now, because, well, you know, Nurglings, so why not these? They'd have to have a lot of weird animations and so on, because obviously the End Times variant is a bit out there, but, I mean, come on, it looks cool, right? Now, in terms of 8th edition, yeah, that's pretty much done when it comes to just anything, really. The army book was pretty much almost complete. However, there is one thing that wasn't in the tabletop that a lot of people are asking for, and then we'll start looking towards the supplements, and that was Graveguard with halberds, which weren't a thing on the tabletop, but I can see why people want it, you know, give an anti-large option to the Graveguard, which, yeah, would be kind of cool, and it's not out of the realm of question to happen. Like, anytime I've spoken about the vampire counts, I always get a few comments saying, yeah, Graveguard with halberds, and I would say that I think Creative Assembly even know at this point. A lot of people have been suggesting it in multiple creative videos. So at this point, there's really not much missing. There is stuff from, say, for example, Kemmler's supplements, but I don't think he's going to get a dedicated DLC if he was already playable. But what I would say, it would be nice for the Von Carstein specifically to have better access to militia and all the types of state troops and so on, just to be able to have more of that 6th edition feel. Should we ever get a Strigoi DLC, then we can get the Strigoi too, as they are more like peasant bowmen, peasant horse archers and so on, and it would be kind of cool to have that to be a very drastically different vampire count faction too. Lemians could get access to some Tomb Kings just for fun, and the Necrotic could get access to, say, maybe Patchwork Men, just for adding in something. As for the Blood Dragons, maybe Blood Dragon units on foot, and you're pretty much sorted. That gives something different to all the different bloodlines to make them a bit more unique. Again, this is just speculation, but keep in mind that the vampire rework, whilst good, could be done a bit better if we get more bloodlines into the game, which I'm really much expecting. Like, Neferata is almost a given at this point, and it's just to add in stuff for the future, just to make them a bit more unique and then more replayability. I've just realized that we are missing the bat swarms, but really the fell bats do exactly the same thing, so it's really not needed. I just wanted to point it out there because I was just looking through my vampire count minis as I'm taking breaks whilst I'm working on the video. I'm trying to actually get some stuff ready for the battle reports, and I saw the fell bats there and the bat swarms. I was like, oh yeah, they're two different things. If you're not too familiar with the tabletop, the fell bats were actually a bigger creature where they used to come in unit sizes of 2+, and the bat swarms were the actual swarms. They just changed that around, and I guess it makes sense. So technically, we did have a swarm, they just didn't call it a swarm. So with that being said, we can now look towards missing characters. Yeah, there was literally not that much missing for the vampire counts. Now, when it comes to characters, we already have 5 playable legendary lords. It would be 6 if the Red Duke was a proper legendary lord, but he's kind of like Boris Todbring at the moment, where he is, but he's not playable at the start, unless you're using mods. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. So as playable starts, we currently have access to the bloodline known as the Von Carsteins, which are kind of the mainstay, especially for 8th edition, and obviously a Necromancer faction too with Heinrich Kemmler. So if we factored in all the missing bloodlines, missing legendary lords, then you would have a lot of playable characters. Keep in mind that this would probably be one of the races with the most different playable characters. Obviously not counting Chaos, because now they've decided to divide them. So let's start looking towards all the different bloodlines and any different sections. We're not going to go with too many because, well, it just makes sense. We're not going to have like 80 playable vampire count lords and like 10 of others. First, let's look towards the Von Carsteins, and yes, I know there's too many legendary lords for them, but I'm thinking more of a legendary hero. This is Conrad von Carstein, one of the most popular and most terrifying characters in lore. He's pretty much a mad dog, an absolute psychopath, and really well liked because of it. He was also fairly powerful on the tabletop too. He's got a cool model, which was more reminiscent of that of a blood dragon, and it was just kind of cool. Core factor as always is a big thing. I think that he would be a perfect legendary hero choice, but for some reason we still are very much lacking on legendary heroes. So I'm pretty sure that people wouldn't be too against him being added in if he was just a legendary hero, and it kind of makes sense instead of having him as a lord choice. We already have, what, 3 different ones? Technically 4 if we count Ghost, because he's part of that same family in a sense, just as a Necromancer student. But generally I think that he'll just be cool. He's a personal favorite of mine, and I'd like to see him playable. There's some cool mods though, so not too disappointed if he doesn't get added in officially. Now we look towards the Lamians, and really there's only one choice, Neferata herself, as she is the most beautiful vampire and everyone's really been waiting for her. They've also kind of been hinting at her for a while now, especially since in the Warhammer 2 Mortal Empires map, both of her bases of operations are there. Her main base of operations, which is in the World's Edge Mountain, is also in the Game 3 map, so it kind of points to that being one of the first, at least, cross-game DLCs. Well, hopefully like third, because first, like, Chaos and Norska, because they really need help. Gameplay-wise, her faction shouldn't really focus on all-out war, but rather espionage, which I kind of suggested ages ago. The Cao Cao mechanic that was introduced through a DLC in Three Kingdoms would be perfect for her, as it allows her to kind of mess with other factions in a very similar way to Tzeentch, but not as strong. Obviously, she wouldn't be able to teleport factions between factions and so on, but more into the idea of just kinda making others declare war on each other, ruining the supply chances and so on. You know, just kind of things that you'd expect from a spy-heavy faction. So before we move on to another bloodline, I kinda want to do a separate sub-faction where I'm putting the Red Duke and Malobord together. Both of these are former Bretonnians who have become vampires, and it would be kinda interesting if we had like a separate hybrid faction, a mix between that of Bretonnians just turned to the dark, you know, some undead knights and so on, some evil peasants, with some vampire count units. I don't know where Creative Assembly stands on these hybrid factions. There's obviously a very cool mod that does that anyway, but it would be nice to see that done officially, as it kind of always fit in the lore. It was always established lore, but we never really had any official tabletop armies to that degree and so on. People did do that though. There was actually a few times where you'd see allied lists and they'd have Bretonnians mixed up with vampire counts, and it was fairly interesting to play against. It wasn't too competitive, but then again it was more just for fun. I doubt we'll see Malobord because he was kind of brought in for the whole end times story more than anything else. Whilst we're still dabbling on the end times, Creative Assembly can say that they're not, but they really are every now and then. It would make more sense for the Red Duke to do it, unless they wanted to bring in a separate character, because we already have the Red Duke. It's just they need to just give him a proper start, like, icon, and that's it. Either way, I thought that would be fun, so I decided to just put that into this video for just a little second. So let's start moving on. If we look towards the Blood Dragons now, there's pretty much two choices. There's obviously Aborash, which is the sire of the actual bloodline, and Wallach Harkin. Both of them are very well-known characters and so on. It's really more of a personal preference, I guess, that I'd prefer the sire, mainly because those are the strongest, and I really doubt that we're going to get both, though Wallach Harkin sounds better if we end up getting Blood Keep as a start position, because, you know, that's kind of cooler. I'd really doubt that we get both, but basically, when it comes to the Blood Dragons, their playstyle, especially in the earlier editions when lists could be themed, they didn't really have access to a lot of magic, but instead were better at close combat. They'd be able to do a lot of damage, and they were blenders. That's how they pretty much kind of worked. It's more about martial prowess than magical prowess, and I thought that was kind of cool. You still had access to magic anyway, but you would be able to do loads of challenges, you'd be able to kill off loads of units there in the battlefield, and it would be interesting to see, like I said earlier with units, Blood Dragon units and so on, because we currently have the Horsemen, so it would be nice if we had further Blood Dragons. My only literal worry when it comes to the vampire counts is that other bloodlines are going to be brought in and everyone's going to play exactly the same, which I really hope is not the case, because they should be diversified at least by a mechanic or two, or just a different playstyle because of an extra unit more than anything else. Now we can look towards the Strigoi bloodline, which is, well, they don't have a lot of choices. They've got either Yushoran or Yushuran, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that's the sire of the bloodline, or I'd say Vorag Bloodytooth. Both of them were quite big, both of them led quite large nations. Well, for being a Strigoi at the very least, a lot of vampires didn't really lead cities or anything, whereas the Strigoi kinda actively did. Despite their bestial appearance, they were always kinda more nicer in a sense, until they lose their minds, that is. Vorag is probably the best choice. Both of them, I believe, are dead at the point, but yeah, you know how it's Creative Assembly are, they can bring anyone back. I would prefer the sire, because obviously sires are more powerful and so on, but Vorag works well. Neither of them actually had any models, I believe. There's also very, very little art, which I think Yushuran's one actually goes to the generic Strigoi one now. It's just one of these things that was never really established too heavily upon, but either way, the possible playstyle for any possible Strigoi Legendary Lord would be quite different to all the other vampires, as they would have access to the Strigoi, as I mentioned earlier, which would be kind of like a nomadic race. They'd also have access to bows, horse archers, and so on. This was mostly fleshed out upon, I believe, in 6th edition and the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay books, but I'm not too sure about the roleplay books. It would be kind of cool, as it would be very different. You'd have range, which obviously for the vampires is non-existent, barring just those few levies that you can get, and you can make full armies of them. Plus, it would be more beneficial for you to work with ghouls, heavily buffing them up, and having a more playstyle oriented on hitting and run tactics. And finally, we have the Necrotic vampires. There's a few choices, but really the only one that makes sense is Zacharias the Ever-Living, mainly because he's such a popular character. This is a very powerful vampire, not only in magical, but also physical strength too. And really, you know, with a zombie dragon mount and so on, that would hopefully be unique and not a reskin. He kind of makes the best choice out of all the possible vampires. I mean, some people might think otherwise, and yeah, it's always up to debate, so if you think otherwise, put a comment down below, we can discuss, but I'd say Zacharias just is the easiest one for anything. Plus, he's a character that's been in the lore for a decent amount of time, still showed up in the end times too, because nothing really is dead in this universe, it's just one of those things, and even tried to defy Nagash himself, so if Nagash gets added in, which I think is almost certain at this point, he could even be added in as a FLC character and have a story going against Nagash, which would be kind of interesting. But that's pretty much it. I didn't want to go too heavy on the missing characters and so on, because as you've seen, even if we just add in one per bloodline, excluding the Von Carsteins, it's going to take us up to like 9 Legendary Lords. Maybe even more if they decide to add in others, but I really think they're just going to do one of each bloodline remaining, and that's pretty much it, because yeah, too many characters would be too much. There's only so much that they can add in, so either FLC characters or as character packs if Creative Assembly just want to sell off characters, and that's pretty much it because there's like no other units. All in all, I say that the vampires are in a good position at the moment. Some uniqueness and other bloodlines would be great, but really, they are good. They're a fun faction to play. They have pretty much everything. Obviously, halberds on the Graveguard would be very, very much liked, and there's a few missing units. But all in all, the vampires are very much complete. Not only to a 8th edition standard, but also just going down to 6th, which is one of the more popular editions too. I think a minor rework coming in and just adding some unique mechanics to the other legendary lords would be cool, but other than that, I can't really think of anything else. If you guys have suggestions, let me know, but I honestly think that, yeah, the vampires, after a single DLC with Neferata, and maybe a few FLC characters, they're completed. Though with all that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below, let's start a discussion, and when we come back to the series, we're going to start looking at a faction that actually has quite a decent amount of missing units, I'd say, so that will be very different. So the Greenskins themselves will focus more on reskins, the Vampire Counts will focus more on characters, this one will be focused mostly on units. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.